Welcome, everybody, to podcast number 4 of What in the World. And we're recording this on the 4th of July, the 250th birthday of the United States of America. Happy birthday, America. Hope you have a great birthday. You get lots of presents and celebrate. And here's to 250 more. Joining us this morning, this evening, this afternoon, all over the world. Let me introduce our group of friends and family. We've got Jan Lapidote. This is his Jan Lapidote 2.0. Those of you who saw our first podcast met Jan's dad. Jan is also a dear friend of the family and an old friend from many, many years gone by, living in Sweden, doing social enterprise, operating as a chaos pilot friend. Jan, welcome aboard. Glad to have you here.
Thank you.
And you are going to be teed up in a minute to give us the Swedish perspective. Live from Singapore, Tony Lai. Tony, welcome. Glad you could come back and join us again. You had to skip a couple episodes, but you're back for our birthday episode. And in Austria, Thomas Plutzenator. Thank you, Thomas, for joining us. You're looking
Happy
good. You're looking
birthday.
healthy. Thank you. I don't feel a day over 249. We're having all kinds of conflicting emotions on our birthday this time. As a country, we are happy to celebrate. We're not quite as together as we used to be. Many people are comparing the 250th to the 200th 50 years ago, where the celebration seemed to be much more unrestrained and unified, and now a lot more self criticism, a lot more navel gazing in a good way, I think. Listening to our friends all over the world who are both wishing the United States a happy birthday, but also taking stock of a changing world. So, Jan, let me throw it to you. What's your take on America at 250? How's it look from Scandinavia?
Well, I didn't dare rely on my own views only, so because I think I'm a bit skewed and biased. But I did a bit of research with my helpful AI assistant, so I have a few things that I think it's a really interesting point in time to both experience and congratulations. Coming from, this is one of the things I uncovered, is that Sweden as a state is supposedly around 1,000 years. So you guys are growing up.
We're a
And
teenager. We're a frisky teenager.
exactly, that's one way of putting it, right? So it's also, I think, a good. I mean, even though these numbers are humanly constructed as important, it's a good point to stop for a while and reflect a bit on what's going on. But I think from a Swedish perspective, maybe Scandinavian, but I will speak mostly from Swedish, is that the perception of the US has really, really shifted the last 5-10 years in at least my life and what I can see and hear. And I needed some more than my own, experience to back it up with. But and I think there are studies now that show that the perception of the U.S. from a Swedish point of view has changed a lot in the last 5-6 years, and I think it's partly due to the current administration, but also before that things were moving, and it has become a bit more extreme in the last years in terms of sort of also asking critical questions about our relationship to the US, and where are we in that, and we also have this European Federation that we are part of, and I think some of the issues that have been wandering around in our media the last couple of years really bring that forward and make us aware of that maybe the way we have related to the US needs to also change a bit and is changing a bit. And I don't think if the US has been kind of like the hallmark for freedom and influence in terms of culture and all that, this is gradually shifting.
So
So
you're being very diplomatic, Jan.
yeah,
When you
but
say things,
I think I need to because it's with age. I never don't know if the other fellows in the call are going to. With age, you become less certain about things. It's like you can throw things out, but then am I making this up or is it? And I think the one, but I do. I mean, I do carry a few things, but they cannot only be mirrored towards the U.S. They mirror back at myself and the country I live in. Like so, one is this. Very violent culture that has been a hallmark of the U.S. I think for a long time, and also internationally and geopolitically and all that. And you could go, oh, Sweden is kind of innocent in that sense. No, 400 or 500 years ago, we owned half of Europe, and we cried when we lost Finland, and we cried when we lost Norway, and things like that. So we've been in our own way through some of these, larger shifts of being call it imperialist and colonial in our activities, and now have to find new ways and a new role in the world. And I'm not saying that's what's waiting for the US, but it's definitely relevant to mirror, I think.
thank you.
Yeah.
Let's Tony, you can speak for all of Asia, of course. Sitting
As
in
I'm speaking for
Singapore.
all of
Yeah,
Scandinavia. Yeah, thanks.
yeah, you guys have global passports, and you speak not only for a country, you speak for your whole region. So, Tony, tell us about Asia.
Well, first, happy birthday, America, and Alan, it's very personal for me, and I want to share with my friends here. My dad worked for Ford Motor Company, and he was the general manager for Singapore for Ford Motor Company, and later for West Pharmapack, which is a pharmaceutical company. So in 1982, when I was just 12, was my first visit to the US because my dad was there for a training program. And the very first city I went to was St. Petersburg, Florida. And the first great American food I had was Howard Johnson's Diner on the freeway. And for a kid from Singapore, and never having left my country or my region of for maybe since I was born, to be there, to turn on the television, to watch Perry Mason in black and white, to be inducted in American culture, to be able to see all of that, Alan, was amazing. Absolutely amazing, right? And then fast forward all the way to the time I was 32, I joined a firm called the Idea Factory in San Francisco, and that changed my life for 9 years. And I worked for an American firm. I was very fortunate to do a buyout, but after that, we always called ourselves founded in San Francisco, which is why I still wear the Levi Strauss shirt right here today in celebration of the US. Yay! Which was one of my best clients I had, and I got to work with the Levi's company. It's emotional. It's personal. It's from the outside looking in. I'm not American. I only have hopes and dreams and beliefs that things will get better. But as we get through this podcast, I'll share more. But Asia is watching the US with bated breath, anticipation, and fear. There is a lot of hope that the US will get it right, but until then, security and trade are the two biggest fears we have. Because those two things are so real for us, they are existential in our world looking at the US.
Thanks, Tony, and I love your story about your first trip to the States. I think that's something that I mean. There are things that are moments that make it more than just a global think tank. It's personal and it's emotional. So thanks for sharing, Thomas. You finally settled in there. Are you comfortable?
Yes,
Oh,
I
okay,
I have
making
to
us
find
all
my place today.
making us all a little seasick as you travel around Austria there. You have a deep and abiding set of relationships with the U.S. and trips to the U.S., visits, and friends who come visit you in Austria. What Austria
Well,
is a country in the that historically has played a pivotal role in the middle of Europe, a place where there's a lot of UN activity uh, and really a country that has had a keystone role in the world affairs. What as you reflect on your own relationship to the United States and this 250th birthday with all the good, the bad, and the ugly, to quote Clint Eastwood, and also a great American hero. What comes away from the Austrian point of view? What are you hearing, seeing, feeling in the middle of Europe?
well, to follow up Tony's story, my first trip was in 1983 during the peak of Reagan, and I worked there for an advertising agency in the Chrysler Building. And I was 19 years old, and I was absolutely fascinated to finally be on the ground of American soul and go to the Studio 54 and having fun. I remember I was at parties in Manhattan, and I thought there are actually no problems, and if there are any problems, America would be there to solve them. We were still This was still the Cold War, but it was absolutely clear who is the bad and who is the ugly. And it was absolutely the sort of the world was divided between West and East, and nobody really had a look on China at that point. China was still sort of somehow a sleeping bear somewhere, anonymous, and Africa was of course a white piece of white piece on the map. And then I continued to, I made a lot of friends. I visited back and forth. I made a postgraduate at the Wharton Business School, and this was an interesting year because it was in 2001, right before September 11. And after the end of the Cold War. So this was the time where the internet was there, but it was still in a sort of baby in a sort of baby structure in the first couple of years. And the Cold War was over, and it was before September 11, so there were no problems with the Islamic issues and terrorism and so on. So sort of we thought the world is perfect, and the only question we have is how can we divide this wealth which will come through the internet and through things which are in front of us. And definitely America was the driving force for good. I mean, there was no question about it, that nobody would even think about that America was not always on the right side. Obviously, even then, it was probably a little bit naive if you think about Vietnam and Korea and other stuff, and especially the role of America in South America. But from a European and from a Central European perspective, America was definitely on the right side all the time. It was sort of an orientation point, if you want, so a lighthouse for freedom, for values, for democracy, for human rights, for rule of law, and you name it, for science, art. I mean, basically, I couldn't even imagine any kind of field of culture where America was not number one, even sports, etc. And then, September 11 came, Bush came. It started to change a little bit. You would think more critical about America. You would think about more critical about the politics, about also the education system. You would compare the value the states security systems in Europe with the security systems in America and so on. You would maybe, because I also grew up and you see things a little bit more in detail, a little bit more critical. But it was still sort of, there was no question that America is a force for good and it's on the right side. When Obama came, Clinton was interesting. Then 2008 came, and the big financial crisis. And when Obama came, there was another sort of a sun on the horizon where you think, okay, now this is and the next phase of freedom and equality. And then obviously the big backslash came when your real estate mogul came into power, and you would think, okay, there's some kind of mistake in the in this story, and then he said, okay, you know, sometimes systems make mistakes, sometimes it happens, but the balance of power would work, the states would work, the jurisdiction would work, and so on. And then when Trump won was over, and he refused to accept the results, and when there was the attack on the Senate in January, this was definitely the point where you thought, okay, now this is really going wrong. I mean, there is something fundamentally going wrong in this wonderful icon of freedom, democracy, rule of law, and force for good. There is something really wrong. And then you thought, okay, but at least the system put it back and regulated what happened there. But then when he won the second time, you think, okay, now something is really going wrong. I mean, what the hell is going on there? Where is my America? Where is this? Where is the Statue of Liberty here? Where is the Ellis Island of the world, where you always could come? Where you always, I mean, America for a lot of Europeans before the war, definitely during the war and even after the war, it was always, if things go really wrong somewhere in the world, you could always somehow go to America. You will be safe. There will be a rule of law, and if you work there, you will survive. Even if you go there with no money and nothing, somehow you'll be able to survive there. That would be sort of the land, not only of the free, but the land of opportunity. And if opportunity, not in the sense of that you will become enormously rich and powerful, but just that you can survive. It will be a sort of a safe place for the world. A lot of Europeans have seen it as a safe place of the world. And this is now under big danger. There's now a lot of question marks if it is still there. Yeah? Not that I know a couple of new places where you could go, but this is a big question mark and a big backslash, if you want so, in the narrative of the force for good.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. I love the historical references and your own journeys to the States. I myself am obviously a child of the '60s, and so I grew up with a much more, on the one hand and on the other hand, ability to see America. Um, Growing up in the '60s, we knew there were things that needed to be addressed. Uh, we had the impression we were going to address them. Uh, that was when the U.S. was in the throes of a very different kind of self evaluation and an effort to achieve a more perfect union. And we had high ideals, but we had no illusions that there were not deep and serious structural, political, economic, social issues that needed to be addressed. And going back to the '60s, there was a time of great violence. You mentioned, Jan, that America has a history of resorting to guns to solve problems. It's one of our gifts to the world in terms of pop culture. We gave the world westerns and hard-boiled detectives and a lot of other uh, pop cultural references that somehow always end up with a car chase and a gun battle. In my experience in the '60s, we were marching for environmental rights and women's rights and civil rights and a whole host of values that were expressed politically and socially and economically, and it was part of a world movement that was going on everywhere. There were hopes that the world was going to get it right, not just that the United States would somehow be this beacon, which we had been historically. But we couldn't be a beacon without recognizing there was darkness that the light had to pierce through. And I think that was my coming of age period, my experience, both in college and then going into politics and journalism in other parts of the country, and in Oregon and Washington D.C. now, and in Santa Fe. And I still think that those deep U.S. Character qualities exist. they've always existed as a series of dichotomies. A country with capable of great good and also capable of unleashing the atomic bomb. A country of great compassion, also a country where we ignore uh, poverty in other parts of the world or in our own country where we don't want to look at it. And Jan, your reference to the Scandinavian experience is very helpful because we're also just talking about the way human beings are in the world and what nationalism looks like. Thomas, I love how you come back to World War II as a inflection point for Central Europe. Your own awareness as an Austrian of what happens when things get out of control. And in our last podcast, you were worried about rearmament because your experience in Central Europe is when countries rearm, they tend to use those weapons. So
Yes.
it's great to hear all these different points of view. You want to jump in, Tony, with few more reflections, and I'll you can unmute and try to do away with the echo chamber. Go ahead, give us a few more thoughts about where you think America gets it right still, where we still have the confidence of ourselves and of the world, even as we uh, do some serious taking stock, which needs to be done.
You know, if you keep to the metaphor that you sent us the nice email about Miles Davis, Alan, is that the US is still making great music. It's just we have an issue with the front man. Um, and the music is still playing because economically US still doing 2.1% GDP growth last year in 2025. There are still innovations coming out, may not be in the same vein as in the 2000s, the dot coms and all. Generative AI is still being led by the US and a bit of China, of course, but the US is still defining a lot of the technologies around the world. Without doubt, the military is still one of the strongest, maybe depleted in the last 2 months by a single effort in a single place. But overall, everyone still look at the US, even with our sort of, oh, we missed the good old days because we're all coming from the outside. We weren't born in the US, so we didn't have the Springsteen storyline, whereby we went through the 60s, the 70s, the rights movement to fight for what America really is. But we look at what America can be for all of us. And what America can be for all of us, especially for us in Asia, is that post World War II, the ability to bring jobs, trade, economy. We had a different version of the Marshall Plan. It wasn't as structured as the Marshall Plan post Europe. For us, after the Japanese sort of retreated, it was all about all of us trying to find deals and trade with the US and parts of Europe. American created jobs, companies came over. You look at a tiny island like Singapore, we all learn English, and many of the top people here, we all study the US. It's a deliberate policy to be as close to and be able to find that reference point. And from hard nosed stuff like security and trade agreements to soft power, we all grew up. At least for me, like I said, I grew up on Perry Mason first, black and white, and slowly got into Starsky and Hutch, and all the way downstream to Law and Order. Right? Yes, there were guns all over. Of course, the good guys always won. Um, um, but I think the front man, as I circle back to the first metaphor, the issue now we don't like the front man. We like the music. We like the bass player. We like the drummer. But man, we got a problem with the front man.
Tony, I love it. Thank you. Tony was talking about an email I sent early this morning to my three friends. Uh, Francis and I, my wife and I, went to a jazz performance here in Santa Fe last night in honor of Miles Davis's 100th birthday, another great birthday. And I woke up in the middle of the night with the idea that, it's America's birthday, so we should be celebrating getting all the gifts and presents. But I just made a quick mental list of the presents, the gifts that the United States has given the world. Uh, and jazz being foremost in my mind from a Miles concert. And then last week, Francis and I went to a Bob Dylan concert. Bob's 85, a gift, Nobel Prize winner. Thank you very much for that. And then, you mentioned the Marshall Plan. What country in history ever won a war and then used its own financial resources to rebuild the damage of the war in the countries that had been defeated? It's unheard of in the history of the world. Um, Maybe not in Thomas's part of the world, but in my version of history, maybe the Romans. Okay, I don't know. I can't speak for the Roman Empire, but uh, the the Greeks didn't do it. We know that.
But the Romans,
Uh,
the Romans did it. The Romans definitely did it when they conquered a country. They invested enormous amounts of money and built cities and roads and bridges and schools and so on. And obviously the Greeks depend. Alexander the Great, he built enormous cities from Macedonia to India. So that was sort of a role model that he really conquered. I mean, obviously, America. That's a good question. If America conquered Western Europe after the war, you can debate if it was a conquering or not, because obviously, we're having hundreds of thousands of soldiers there, and being sort of the military defender, which was an important and necessary thing against the Soviet Union. But I mean, the influence of America even until 1980, 90 was enormous. The governments would still talk to the ambassador, or sometimes directly to the government, in the sense of when they were thinking about laws. I mean, we have to be honest about this, that the American direct influence in Europe, especially in the NATO countries, in Germany, in Great Britain, France was a little bit different, but also in Italy, because they were furious in Italy that the communists would win some elections in until 2000s. So as long as the Soviets were there, and they supported the Communist Party in Italy with enormous amounts of money for their election. So the especially the informal influence of the United States in Europe was tremendous. I mean, I think maybe not so on the surface, but definitely in reality.
there, you mentioned the Romans. Or I mentioned the Romans, and you agreed. The Pax Americana was a real thing. America
Yes.
was whether we like to talk about it or not, this country was the peacekeeper of the world. And the term soft power was coined to talk about influence without military might, coming through cultural exchange, the Peace Corps, all
Yes.
kinds of innovations designed to take World War II and make sure that that kind of global disaster didn't happen again. And the U.S. was going to be the force for good through NATO, through the UN, through the World Bank, all
USAID.
those USAID. Yeah, that's right. All those institutions that were the best side of this country, if you think that those influences were good. So, Jan,
Yeah, can I
what
chip
comes
in?
to you?
I think, yeah, there's this interesting Swedish angle to this, because I mean, I think I read somewhere that of the 250 years the US has been around, it's like 20 or 30 years you have not been to war, something like that. We haven't been to war for over 200 years and plus. And even the last Second World War, we managed to stay out. There are different opinions if that was an act of cowardice or whatever. But it's no question that it helped us move Sweden from being the poorest country in Europe 150 years ago to being one of the richest in 2 generations, something like that. So staying out of war could actually be a pretty good idea, if you look at how you want to develop a country. Now, maybe easier for a smaller country, but I think it's an interesting side story to mirror. So we, with our natural resources, distributed a lot of that towards Europe for the rebuilding of Europe. So it may have been American money, but it was to a large extent Swedish resources. So some of that American money ended up in Sweden, and so I think that it goes to show that there could be kind of like different strategies, and I think this returning to this also issue where I started out and the relationship between Swedes and the USA is that there was, I just throw a number to you, 79% of Swedes hold a negative view towards US today. It's a Pew Research study last year came out, and I'm assuming that it hasn't become better from the last year. And what has hit us hard now, because we also joined NATO eventually due to a number of things, but partly because I think Finland cornered us in a way. When they joined NATO, we had really no choice but to also join because we are so tightly linked to Finland. But there is now a massive distrust towards the USA. If something should happen on our borders towards Russia, for instance, will the US actually show up? Will they honor the agreements that we have now decided to honor? And it's up in the air. So the whole trust thing, and now we have because Sweden has become sort of a European tech hub in many ways. We have the whole issue about data sovereignty flying around. The stuff we put into American big tech services, where does that end up in the end? Can the frontman, as Tony called it, suddenly bring that to the US and do not so nice things? We don't know. If people who have looked at the agreement say that technically and legally it's possible. So we have this whole movement. I think interesting to hear Thomas in this in Europe at least now. I think where Europe is starting to move and find each other in terms, and also paradoxically to manage where US has showed itself the last year or so. So there's an increasing awareness in Europe that we have to kind of stabilize ourselves and build a lot of things around ourselves, and not in it. So it recalibrates the relationship with the US in many ways, and maybe that is healthy in a sense, because I'm not sure that we were critically always looking at this so-called help we were getting for the US. Was it really help, or was it, as I learned, I just stumbled upon this wonderful statement from the late Russell Ackoff, something to the tune of that in most organizations, the stated objectives are seldom the true objectives.
Let me ask you a slightly different question, because
Sure.
while we're turning the mirror toward the U.S., let's look at the world as well. How much of the insecurity looking at the U.S. now is also a reflection of the insecurity in the world? We had Uffe Elbeck on our program last time, and the Danish government was struggling to form a government.
Yes.
Thomas had talked about the rise of the far right in Austria, and we had Adrian Simpson queued up fast from the UK with the rise of the far right there. It's not the front man in the US may be a problem, but globally, the level of insecurity and lack of clarity, the lack of a sense of, we know how this is going to work out and it's all going to work out okay, is not just a US phenomenon right now. It's not just a US at 250. It's a worldwide challenge. Uffe talked in an earlier podcast, the old rules aren't working and the new rules haven't been written yet. And so where you might in the past have looked to the US and said, at least there's a pillar of stability and a rock of values that is not shakable, we're seeing the world come to terms with a lot of unknowns right now, technological, military, you name it. And I wonder whether that insecurity gets played back toward the U.S. because of the historical dependence on the U.S. to be the one essential nation in the world. Is there any validity to
No,
that?
yeah, I think it's from. If I just answer briefly and then let the others chip in, is I think that's absolutely a good assumption and probably true, because we are. I think I wrote in an email to you guys that the rise. Sorry, I mean we Swedes are skeptical towards Russians, and the Chinese have always been. But and we can continue to be skeptical towards the Russians, and there are some very hard won lessons from the 16s and 1700s when they kind of burned down a lot of Sweden. So that is stuck in our cultural DNA, if you like. So we will never trust Russians, I think, more or less. But what has happened is there's also a shift in Swedish relationships towards China, where they are gradually becoming a bit more positive. And I think that is also something to bring back into this discussion. So I'm not a geopolitical observer in any way, but the sense I have is, and also the point I was going towards is what I think becomes more of a Swedish perspective of this, because we are supposedly a nature-loving people, and I think that to a large degree is true. When I look out the window here, where I'm sitting just by the sea, there are so many changes in the natural environment that are due and scientifically proven to us humans. And on this larger level, we just carry on like it doesn't matter. And I think that also brings in a lot of the questions that we are facing right now. And interesting, I haven't dug deep into it, but the Chinese new policy of ecological civilization is something we should look a bit deeper towards, where they are integrating this ecological perspective into the whole governance structure of China, as I understand it. And I don't see Russia doing that. I don't see the US doing that. And from that point of view, that could be a potential leadership position from China in the global game, because whoever is addressing the ecological challenges, I think, gets an upside right now. Not that you have concrete solutions necessarily, but at least you're addressing the real problem, or one of the sort of life-threatening problems. Sure, bombs are going to kill us as well, but if we don't stop this fossil fuel stuff and all that, then we're going to die eventually anyway. So I think that's where I also bring in our self-reflection in Sweden. We have a similar type of political development as you say in the US and other European countries and around the world. So yes, that was a long answer
Tony?
just to say yes.
Yeah. No, thanks,
Tony,
guys.
what are you hearing?
You know, I appreciate the thoughts, and I think a lot of new questions are emerging because of the insecurities everyone is facing. But no one wants to be the guy who generates the question and works towards finding the answers. Everybody sort of understands things are not working out right. And a lot of people are not trusting the international organizations. You go back to previous wars, everyone's going to make a lot of noise about what the UN or Security Council is doing. But right now, the noise has died down because more of us have given up that the United Nations and Security Council could do anything. Now you got a lot of people wondering what the new systems are going to look like, but no one wants to take up the mantle because the US isn't one of them. So even if US is not the hero storyline of the past, it's neither is it the facilitator storyline of the present. It's not even trying to bring people together to say what the answers could be. And I think that becomes a deepening and deepening of the insecurities. Over to us in Asia, my second point is that the degree of insecurities is just exploding. The Taiwanese have got a political system whereby you got the opposition going all out to try to get the country back to China, with the existing government trying to fend off China. The boats are all around Taiwan, but the semiconductor industry is booming and booming and booming, which creates even more risk for the whole world because that's where our chips are coming from. With that, where is the US? Apart from rhetoric, we're not hearing anything else. The fleet goes in, it goes here and there, if it gets into the waters, but it doesn't do much more than than just that. Further down, you've got the issues with the Philippines, and the Philippines is going head on with China now on over massive issues over the same Spratly Islands, the South China Sea, and everyone's left to fend for ourselves. So, in many ways, Asia is feeling what Europe is feeling in the last couple of years, that we got to be on it on our own. We got to figure out how we want to do it, and exactly what Thomas was saying about arming our military. We are now seeing some countries where they have very weak military powers, like the Philippines. They really are very weak militarily, really considering passing laws to get themselves souped up in that area. These are going to lead to a lot of unintended consequences and a lot of new change that's going to happen. So regional groupings, neighbors got to look out for each other because the US is unlikely to be depended on. But my last point, can I share screen? I want to show a screen to exactly what Jan's last point was about China and the US. So let me see if this works. Yes, this one.
Adam, do we have
Can
the
you see
ability
this?
to share
Can
a
you
screen
see
here?
this?
No, Tony, we're not picking it up.
You're not picking up? Okay. A survey was done from 2022 to 2026.
Whoops.
A survey was done in 2022 to 2026. And for 4 to 5 years, sentiments to the US was as high as at 60%. Last year was the first time China overtook the US at 52% on ASEAN sentiments towards the bigger power. It happened for the first time. And on a social, personal basis, I tell you what shocked me. I grew up at a time where all my friends everywhere will be talking about making a trip to the Grand Canyon or to Miami or to different parts of the US because everyone was showing off that they could go outside of New York and San Francisco. Today, everyone's talking about a trip to Chongqing, to Guangzhou, to second, third tier cities and coming back bragging about how technologically advanced a third tier city in China is. That shift in terms of social peer to peer, people to people relationships have really taken off. It's not at the start engine, it's at ignition and it's at moving.
Thanks, Tony. Sorry we couldn't do this screen share. We'll figure this out for future podcasts, though. We're still in the Shakedown Cruise beta version of our podcast, getting better and better, but we've got some work to do to make it a little more sophisticated. Thomas, I raised the issue about America's self criticism, and I think it's part of what is hardwired into our culture. We don't take anything for granted. We are probably harder on ourselves than the rest of the world is, uh, as part of our effort always to achieve a more perfect union and to be better and to try to live up to the promise of this country in ways that I think is really ultimately to our benefit. It leads to some dark nights of the soul, but we work hard to get better at being a place that people can believe in and live up to our highest values. But we're not alone in the world in terms of things not going the way we'd like to see them go. And I wonder how much criticism that's directed toward the U.S. is also a way of deflecting criticism from within some of our uh, fellow countries around the world.
No, I think we all got a little bit comfortable, and this is part of the post-war narrative. I think that the post-war narrative is or was things are getting better. In the end, they're getting better. There might be some backslashes here and there, some little lightning here and there, but in the end, it's we're on the right road, we're in the right direction, and everything is getting better. The kids will have a better life, and sort of I'm the sort of the first generation who really grew up definitely post-war. Born in '64. There were no, I mean, there were some signs of the Second World War still there, but but I was for me the Second World War was always far away. I mean, I knew obviously people and I had teachers who were in the war, but for me as a person, it was after the war and things are going upwards. Life is getting easier. It's getting more comfortable. It's getting safer. It's getting technologically advanced, more advanced. Everybody's getting richer and so on and so on. And I think as good and as nice this was, this was a little bit of how do you call this in soccer, where you in Germany would say the Abseitsfalle. So when you run at the ball, but you are in ahead of your opponent's
You're
place.
offsides. You're
Offside,
offsides.
offside, offside. So we ran a little bit offside because I think it's a universal truth. Life is a challenge wherever you are, and I think we lost a little bit this feeling that life is a challenge because I think don't we got rid of the Cold War, we got rid of all those diseases, we got rid of the financial crisis and so on. So what to worry about? So I think, and if you are in this one, once you are in this comfort zone and you have a challenge all of a sudden again, and the major player on the field, our Messi, uh, America, yeah, our goal, our matchmaker starts to play for the other side, or is plays for himself. He doesn't even, he's not part of the game anymore. That's a problem. But in the end, we always have challenges, and I think we just have to get our act together again and start working and get over it. I think especially through COVID, all of us got a little bit too comfortable. That you have this remote work and life balance stuff, and don't criticize your employees because it might be bad for their mental health, and if you have a bad day, don't worry about it. So it's all a little bit smooth. It went a little bit smooth. I think we and when I start working in the beginning of the 90s, there was, I mean, maybe this was also wrong, but it was sort of fun to work hard. It was fun to work at night. It was challenging to be faster and better than your competitors. We were. It was almost. There was almost a fun of being tired from work because that was a sign that you do something. Now, when you're tired from work, you think, "Oh my God, he's overworked. He might probably very close to a breakdown or to burnout or something." I think we have to get back to this, that if you do something, if you challenge yourself, if you work hard, that's something good. And obviously, within boundaries, I understand and shouldn't be too hard. But I think we have to face that life is always challenging, and it is easy to say, while to blame now. In the old days, we blamed the Soviet Union and others, and Islam, and now it's even easier. We blame America, and I think especially Europe, we were dependent on American defense. We were dependent on a lot of American science is probably the wrong word because I think we have good scientists, but in the execution of science, in the world, because America is so good in sort of executing stuff, much better than the Europeans. Maybe not as you don't care about mistakes when you come up with a new software and it doesn't work. It's okay. The market will somehow make it work somehow. If the Germans send out a product, it's so perfect that it's already old. Um, that's then the Americans have already the version 3.0. And I think we have to get back in the culture with our coworkers and with our peers that we say, there is bad news. You really have to work. You have to get your act together. You have to pull your arms down and get to work. And if there is a problem, that's life. Huh?
Let's we're going to run out of time here before we run out of interesting things to talk about. I I don't want to leave the field using your soccer metaphor, Thomas. I don't want to walk off the field without at least taking a few shots of my own toward goal. I think
Yeah.
a lot of what our friends see in America as upsetting, concerning. Again, as a child of the '60s, I tend to see as part of the American story. And thank you very much, Tony, for talking about the hero story and the other I mean, these are narratives. We're trying to make sense out of complicated times and people, and we turn them into narratives. America has always been a country of contrasts and of complex contradictions. We are both incredibly parochial. When I was growing up, most Americans didn't have a passport. You'd say, well, why not? And the answer was, why would I leave the US? There's so much to see right here. I don't need to go to Europe or Africa or Asia. I've got the United States to tour. So we're incredibly parochial, and yet we're a global power. Those two things exist side by side, where we believe in individual freedom, but we depend on collective action to get important things done. Seemingly a contradiction, but in the United States, it's hardwired into our national psyche. Liberty, yes, but also fairness and equality, both having to be part of the American story. We believe in the free market, in a form of capitalism that is often unbridled, but many forms of government regulation that we take for granted started in the US as a way of tempering the worst instincts of the free market. And historically, Teddy Roosevelt, these great political figures who we've forgotten about in the moment we're in right now, charted a course for this country that really does try to find a middle ground between these conflicting values. So I don't think it's always been one or the other. Jerry Brown, when he was governor of California, talked about paddling on one side of the canoe for a while and then paddling on the other side of the canoe, and you try to keep the canoe more or less going straight. And I think that's always been part of the United States and our very complex, messy, not the soccer player, messy world that we live in. Thomas, to your point, life is messy. Life is complicated. Problems are getting hard. Um, I think it was a sign on Obama's desk that said, "Hard things are hard."
Mm.
And we're in a period of time where at 250, it's a good moment to take if we're all watching the World Cup. It's time for a little break for hydration
Hydration break, yeah.
and pull our side together, get in a huddle, and talk about what we do in the next 15 minutes, and hope that this game goes into overtime. We want extra minutes.
Mm.
So we're
Yes.
gonna let's wrap it up with this. I appreciate everybody chiming in. Thanks for joining us again. Thanks, Adam Weber, for running the board. We'll work on some of our sound problems and our technical difficulties. We're getting better and better. But I don't want to stop without a few last words. Not going to call on everybody to sing the Beatles version of Birthday. I think that would be a terrible idea, but it's playing in my headset. Uh, so, Jan, America at 250.
Now, I think what would be a real contribution, a continued contribution, is to dig out some of the things I think are really hallmarks of what I've experienced as the US, apart from the jazz then. But this beacon of diversity, if you like, that this is the one country where you've made diversity on a large scale work. The other I was thinking about is the contradictions and the not ending up in the either or conversations, but rather the both and conversations. And for that, I think we do have a set of leaders around the world who are kind of playing their citizens with the either or narrative rather than the complexity that is there. I would love to see the US to kind of take the leadership role in that and expressing another type of call it global dialogue, global conversation where we stick to the complexity and stay it and dare to and not be afraid of it. I agree with Thomas and Tony in that sense that there's so much to be worked on. But the old kind of cultures and methods that we have and strategies we've been using are perhaps outdated in a sense, and that goes for Sweden just as well as the US. So that it's not pointing at one specific country, but maybe we can use this celebration period and the reflect hydration break to kind of recalibrate and start oh, maybe there are some things that got lost underway. I think dialogue is one of those.
Thank you. And Jan, we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining this crew of international characters, thought leaders, experienced observers. It's great to have you on board. Tony, unmute and give us your final thoughts.
The, the recognition of challenges doesn't take away the hope we still have for the US. And I'm going to say that one of the things I've loved was Levi Strauss. I got to work with them for 5 years. All my genes are Levi Strauss. And one of the best campaign I ever worked with them was the campaign called Stay True. And Stay True was when you wear a pair of denims, you are who you are. You will be unwavering. You will be yourself. And you will have the guts to rock it out, whether like Springsteen or like Steve Jobs, who always wears denims, blue jeans, right? So if there's a hope for the US is to always stay true. There will always be tough moments. There will always be turbulence, but keep the jeans on, please.
Tony, thank you for pointing out that another gift that the United States gave to the world is jeans. You're welcome. And the iPod and the iPhone, uh, and Bruce and Dylan and the birth of cool. Thank you, Miles. So yeah, keep on rocking in the free world. Thomas, what do you think? I know you're not wearing jeans, Thomas, but what are you thinking about these days?
I think the biggest gift of America is the first sentence in this Constitution: "We the people." In the sense of, depend on yourself. It's your own responsibility, and if you have a problem, don't blame someone else. Blame yourself, and get out of your own mess. And I think this great thought of the Constitution, not rely on a king or on an aristocracy or something, but it's on you. It's on yourself. On our community, yes, not only on yourself. It's not I, but it's we. But I mean, this thought that, find peers where you can work together and solve the problem. That's a fantastic thought and a fantastic gift to America and to the world.
Thank you, guys. Thanks everybody for joining us. Happy birthday, America.
Thank you.
Happy birthday to all of you who have visited America. Come back and see us again. The World Cup, we're drawing huge crowds. People are coming here thinking it's not going to be a good experience and being blown away by what a great experience it really is. So our better natures are rising to the surface. People are going home with ranch dressing in their suitcases. I'm not sure why, but they are. The Norwegian striker is wearing a cowboy hat. And so I think there's hope, hope in the world, if not necessarily in the international councils, at least on the soccer pitch and in the stadium. So it's great to see everybody. We'll reconvene in a couple weeks with our next podcast. Until then, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Take care. Stay well. See you soon. Bye, everybody.